All right. Grot Talk with music still. See how long that lasts. So, Miss Susan would like to read something relative to the topic.
Well, actually, this after doing a lot of looking and reading and studying and issuing right-to-know requests, many of which are still unanswered, I came up with a piece from the Josiah Bartlett Center. And anyone listening and who is concerned or wants to understand what really happened and why there's nothing we can do about it, if you go to Josiah Bartlett's website and look up an article from 2013 called Meet the Met, M-E-T, which is a Medicaid enhancement tax. That's the deal that got altered, right? And caused all the trouble. So let me read you the summary, and then there's a couple of things within here that I'd like to read because I want to make sure that I get this exactly correct. So the summary here, the Medicaid enhancement tax. New Hampshire adopted the Medicaid enhancement tax as a means to leverage federal matching funds without imposing any real tax liability on hospitals. Now, you can dissect that sentence any way you want. But after 2 decades, budget writers finally ended the practice that became known as Metascam by turning this phantom tax into a real one. Faced with a new multi-million-dollar tax liability, New Hampshire hospitals took the state to court and started paying closer attention to how much they owed. As the legislature struggles to understand a huge source of state revenue that went without much oversight for 20 years, how they change the Medicaid enhancement tax will have expensive implications for state budget and state hospitals for years to come. This paper will outline the history, blah, blah, blah. Now, the disproportionate share payment, which is part of this. It says here, under the federal Medicaid program, participating states, split the cost for providing health care to low-income recipients with the feds. Most states, including New Hampshire, elect to reimburse hospitals for treatment based on a fee-for-service model. Reimbursement rates are set by state officials but must be approved by CMS. Now, in New Hampshire began making disproportionate share payments, that's what this is called, in fiscal year 1992 during Judd Gregg's administration. At the same time, it imposed a new revenue stream to pay for them. The Medicaid enhancement tax was a 6% levy on hospitals' gross patient service revenue, essentially every dollar charged for patient care at all 28 New Hampshire hospitals. Every state was designated a disproportionate share hospital and captured both Medicaid expansion tax and disproportionate share hospitals. For example, if a hospital owed $10 million under this Medicaid enhancement tax that was brought under Judd Gregg, it would send its payment to the state, which would send a reimbursement payment to the same hospital later that same day. The federal government would soon get an application for the amount of money that the state sent to the hospital, a matching grant, which would be deposited directly in New Hampshire's general fund. So let's think about it. Under Medicaid expansion tax, if you're the Elliott Hospital, which is so ably represented by volunteer board member Joe LaChance, you got a Medicaid enhancement tax bill of, let's say, $100. Mm-hmm. Okay, you paid that $100 to the state. The state immediately turned around and gave you $50 back, right? The state then sent a bill to the feds showing that they had paid you $50 for your disproportionate share costs. The feds would then give match that $50. They'd give that money back to the state of New Hampshire. New Hampshire then gave that $50 back to the hospitals and made them whole.
But
So the hospitals never lost any money.
But the state was up $50, which they had stolen from the feds by false pretenses. Essentially,
Wasn't from the feds. The feds were stealing it from us.
Wow.
But it was the deal. That was the deal until Lando Calrissian came along and said, "You know what?
Bill O'Brien.
We're gonna alter the terms of the deal." So they didn't automatically get all of that money back. That was, in fact, a tax.
Mm-hmm.
And they were not refunded 100%, even though perhaps the state got the money back and kept it. So there's been a big fight going on. And enter, if you will, expanded Medicaid, or Medicaid expansion, which originally was mandatory under Obamacare.
Right, but the states proved that it wasn't, in fact, mandatory, and a bunch of them decided to stiff the feds.
Well, they proved it was unconstitutional.
Yeah.
But then it became voluntary. So participation in voluntary expanded Medicaid was the norm. So expanded Medicaid sought to capture a whole different population than the original Medicaid, which rightly, wrongly, or indifferently, and has gotten out of hand, was really originally intended to help the truly poor.
It's like a big have-a-heart trap.
Exactly. But now there's blood on the floor, okay, where there wasn't before. So the original Medicaid really sought to help children, poor children, the truly disabled, the truly poor, and give them some sort of, I hate the phrase, but safety net.
And in this case, people who weren't being cared for by others, family members or whatever.
Yeah. And you know, if we think that that's the right thing to do, if government should be covering that cost, then that was the original intent of Medicaid. Certainly it's been abused, but expanded Medicaid said, well, you know what? There's people out there that maybe we ought to help too. And it was turned out to be, quote, the mentally ill and those with substance abuse issues. But the profile of the population that has been captured under expanded Medicaid are primarily able-bodied, childless adults who aren't working or are working, maybe part-time or a job here or there to pay for their bad habits. So New Hampshire has enrolled, since the passage of expanded Medicaid, some 50,000 people who now get this same sort of, quote, free money from the feds, and this in the same fashion it's being laundered through state government. And these people, the state will say, well, you know, we're having them, we're helping them get private insurance, right, so they can attend to their needs, their health needs.
But they don't.
Well, maybe they do, maybe they don't. But the idea is, you know what? Now this has reduced this disproportionate share cost that hospitals had been experiencing because, since they altered the terms of the deal, they weren't getting covered for all of their out-of-pocket or charitable care, which every single one of these guys, with the exception of two, are 501c3 fully tax-exempt hospitals. So they're exempt from any tax. And the basis for that exemption is they are charities, and they're supposed to be providing charitable care to their population. But
quick heads up, we're going to Spreaker listeners and anybody on NHCRock.com, please go to GraniteRock.com and start watching the video live stream because the audio is going to drop any minute. Please proceed.
Any minute. So these hospitals are getting a fair majority of their charitable expenses covered already, and because the tax, the Medicaid expansion tax, is in fact a, quote, real one to the hospitals, it appears that they have increased their costs or charges because that lowers the exposure of their patient revenue stream to the tax. So it's a bit of a bigger scam, but nevertheless, the DHHS and the legislature and all these folks saying disproportionate share costs have dropped dramatically because they've laundered money from another source in the form of, quote, private insurance to cover the alleged costs of this less than vulnerable population who walk into the emergency room because they've, I don't know, overdosed on whatever.
Bath salts.
Bath salts, perhaps. So it's a willing co-conspiracy in the state of New Hampshire, and we're the suckers. So,
Man, that's complicated.
well, but isn't that what politicians say when issues are difficult? They say, well, that's a complex issue.
Because they've made it so. Because they've made the money crisscross and go round and round instead of keeping it simple.
Yeah, I mean, used to be in the old days when you were laundering things, you had two cycles. You had a hot water and a cold water cycle. But if you look at washing machines today, oh my God, you can program to do almost anything. So money laundering has become much more complicated,
Including wrap it in foil and put it in your freezer for you.
and technical. But this is this is nothing more than money laundering. And what's truly frightening and should frighten listeners is when you look at the revenue sources. For the state of New Hampshire. New Hampshire, with the taxes that it does impose, collects in New Hampshire just about 60% of what it spends. The rest of that money is taken from taxpayers here and other states, sent to Washington, and then they divide it up and send it back.
How do we claim that this is a donor state if, in fact, 40% of our budget comes from federal tax monies? Unless, of course, the federal taxes paid by our citizens are more than that 40%.
Well, we do still have an above-average annual income in the state of New Hampshire. It used to be one of the highest. I don't know if it still is.
It's what, 61,000?
62,000.
61,000. Yeah. But the funny thing is, they say, well, we're just getting our tax dollars back. Well, let me ask you a question. Have either of you gotten any of those tax dollars back?
No.
Mike? Skip? No. You there?
I am.
Did you get any of those tax dollars back?
Of course not. But that is just like the.
We totally lost your volume.
But I mean, it's the same old thing. That whole phrase of the most vulnerable among us. We have to get our tax dollars back. They're both equivalent covers for the same thing. And you look at this, and I haven't posted it yet, but both our senators, Ayotte and Shaheen, went to hat in hand to ask for another $600 million more. And I look at that as an absolute affront. Because they're fleecing federal taxpayers to be able to pay for this. And yet here, to be able to bring that back to New Hampshire, even as the folks here with Medicaid expansion are saying, hey, we need Medicaid expansion so we can solve our opiate crisis. It's like, I'm sorry, get your acts together, except they both just don't seem to understand, we're getting this free money so that New Hampshire taxpayers won't have to foot the bill. Well, last time I looked, most of the people that I see around me, and probably all those people who were lobbying as well, Susan, as you went to these hearings, are all federal taxpayers, and I bet you not.
There you go again.
There he goes again.
Well,
yeah, there he goes again. We're not going to cut you off, Skip. Speak up when you can hear us properly. Your audio got interrupted. You're going to have problems with your cable company.
Wait, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, so, I look at this and I just get utterly frustrated. And again, back to the newsread of the
You're gone again. Yeah, back to the newsread.
Well, as part of this research yesterday, I stumbled across something called DSRIP, which I don't remember the full acronym, but this is a $150 million.
The drip with an S in it.
The drip with an S in it.
Water torture.
It's $150 million that was announced January the 5th of this year that's supposed to be used for all sorts of innovative programs and management for substance abuse and mental illness problems. And I'm thinking January 5th, Well, it turns out that it's another waiver, quote, that the state gets. So when you look at the timing of last November's, oh my God, we got to have a special session to address substance abuse when they'd been stealing from the alcohol fund all these years. The November special session apparently was necessary to get laws staged to have this January 5th draft approval or tentative approval for this other $150 million that's coming in for substance abuse. Now, the recipients of this $150 million are not the hospitals, but they're local organizations, the Seacoast whatever, all these various community groups that are getting paid off as well. So it's staggering the amount of money that gets sloshed around that purportedly legislators are bringing back to the state of New Hampshire, but they damn sure don't give it to any of us. They give it to people who didn't pay taxes in the first place. So I'm getting a little tired of this, quite frankly.
Well, and me too. And I am beginning to think that the only answer here is for New Hampshireites to go galt effectively, and to downsize. I mean, much as it pains us in this country, where we should be living the highest standard of living in the world and increasing, it's time to maybe voluntarily reduce or simplify our standard of living so that we have to earn less and we pay less. And so that the inflation, which they keep hitting us with, the hidden costs of the Federal Reserve, doesn't impact us so badly. I mean, I know that I'm finding it much harder to keep up with my expenses than I was a few years ago, and I'm looking at downsizing. And if enough people go galt, or at least half galt, and reduce what they're paying to the government, this whole edifice is going to come tumbling down.
Well, I know you had Emily Sandblade on a couple of weeks ago talking about the New Hampshire income tax calculator. And as we were studying expanded Medicaid, we had stumbled across this. I'm sure she talked about the LSR that a Democrat representative from Concord, Paul Henley, had a marker he'd set aside that was relative to, quote, a New Hampshire income tax. He pulled that LSR and it didn't go to legislation, but he substituted a website called www.newhampshiretaxshift.com that laid out this plan that actually was revenue neutral, but he says, we need to stop relying on property taxes to fund our state government. And so what he did with the same pair of pants, he changed the pockets, and he eliminated a number of taxes that the Department of Revenue Administration administers, one of which was the statewide education property tax, which is statutorily set at $363 million or something. And if you look on your bill that you get from the town, there's a little thing that says statewide property tax, and it's, I don't know, $2, somewhere $1.90 to
per thousand,
to $2.60, depending upon where you are, per thousand value against your house. And he's saying, we're going to lower your property tax. Well, there isn't anybody in New Hampshire that doesn't say, Yahoo, I want to lower my property tax. So it's a bit disingenuous, because on his site, he doesn't call it the statewide education property tax. He calls it the statewide property tax.
But we're going to take a really short break, because I think we still can. But the point with that is he's taking a tax that's visible and trying to make it invisible.
Oh, you have no idea.
Okay, we'll be right back. Hopefully this works. You will probably drop out off speaker during this little audio break, but come right back. GraniteGrok.com. We're there.
Need more Grok Talk? Well, you can catch new shows Saturday mornings from 9 to 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Miss a show? Not a problem. Past shows are rebroadcast here daily from 9 to 11 a.m. Monday through Friday. Join us for 2 hours of unapologetic conservatism. And we're not just armed with opinions.